Welcome back to The Real Story. When lawmakers act like they're above the law, society is in trouble. The rule of law is a fundamental part of any republic, or really any functioning society. And when the people who draft or enforce laws violate them, it sends a very dangerous message to everybody. And that brings us to Democrat Representative LaMonica McIver of New Jersey, who currently faces federal assault charges for allegedly attacking ICE agents during a very chaotic protest outside of the Delaney Hall ICE Detention Center in Newark, New Jersey earlier this month. Kristi Noem, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, announced the news on Monday, writing on X, quote, "After a thorough review of the video footage of Delaney Hall and a full investigation from HSI, the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey has made the determination to charge Congresswoman LaMonica McIver for assaulting, resisting, and impeding law enforcement officers. No one is above the law. If any person, regardless of political party, influence, or status, assaults a law enforcement officer, as we witnessed Congresswoman McIver do, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We thank our brave ICE law enforcement officers for their service to this great nation." End quote. And to her point, the DOJ says McIver, along with two other New Jersey Democrats, Reps. Bonnie Watson-Coleman and Rob Menendez, tried to bully their way into the facility in a PR stunt that also led to the arrest of Newark's Mayor Ross Baraka for trespassing, although his charges were later dropped. But all this hysteria, this madness, and for what? Because the Trump administration is enforcing immigration law, which is something every president has the authority to do. End of discussion. Speaking of, the Supreme Court just bolstered that authority by ruling that the Trump administration can end temporary deportation protections for approximately 200,000 Venezuelans living here in the U.S. The Biden administration granted temporary protection status to them, but those protections will now be allowed to end according to the decision issued on Monday. The court's 6-3 ruling reverses a lower court's decision that blocked Trump's attempt to end it. And it also clears the way now for the Department of Homeland Security to finally phase out this program, which was always supposed to be temporary. It was never supposed to be in place long term. And by the way, that's a win for anyone who values border security. However, while the nation's highest court gave the White House a big win on this dispute, they also recently delivered a big loss on a different dispute over immigration enforcement. So on Friday, the Supreme Court said the Trump administration wouldn't be allowed to deport a group of Venezuelan detainees accused of being violent gang members under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, while the legal dispute over it is being resolved in court. The justices ordered the case back to a federal appeals court, actually, directing them to examine what kind of notice the government should provide to illegal immigrants in order for them to be able to challenge their deportations legally. And the court said this order would remain in place until the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled on it, after which the Supreme Court will consider it. Here with reaction is Davis Younts, a military defense attorney with Younts Law. Davis, thank you for being here, sir.
It's an honor to join you.
So there's so much to get into here, but I want to start, of course, with the win coming out of the Supreme Court about temporary protection status. How significant is that?
It's very significant, and what we're seeing is the Supreme Court recognizing that this temporary protected status was done under President Biden's executive authority, and so President Trump, of course, has the authority as the elected president of the United States to overturn Biden's decision and end this protected status for these particular immigrants. So it's a very simple, straightforward, logical, and clear decision, which we don't always get in these cases, but it certainly was a big win in this case.
It certainly was. Now, just for time's sake, I do want to pivot because that's great news from the court. But now this upholding this block on the use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which I know it's a rarely used law from a long time ago, but it still holds. So I want to get your thoughts about the legal dispute over it.
Yeah, so there are so many issues that are involved in this case that I'll just provide a very quick summary. So understand the Supreme Court did not say the president was wrong in invoking the Alien Enemies Act. And in fact, he did this after consulting with his legal advisors, issuing a proclamation laying out the facts on why this is the equivalent of an invasion at the direction of Maduro, the president of Venezuela, for these violent gangs and cartel members to come into the United States and destabilize the United States. That's the stated intent for pushing these people into our country. So the Supreme Court didn't address the president's use of the Alien Enemies Act. What they essentially said is, we don't like the amount of due process or the timing of due process that's being given in this particular case. This gets into a larger question of how are we going to handle these cases? Remember, the Supreme Court has said that a ruling by Judge Boasberg, who's been somewhat infamous here of late with his decisions and his essentially assertion of more authority than the President of the United States from a district court bench, but he tried to block this other ways, and the Supreme Court said no. They have to bring a habeas corpus petition in a specific court, a district court, where they are detained. The problem I have with that legally is now the Supreme Court is treating this as a class action, essentially. That's problematic because the class of plaintiffs haven't established that, and there is no real precedent for a class action in habeas corpus proceedings. Habeas corpus, that's a fancy Latin word that really means the body or the person, who they are. It's used for individuals that are allegedly wrongfully detained by the federal government, and we have no precedent in American history, really, truly, for bringing a class action in this. So the Supreme Court, I think, acted prematurely. What happened in this case is the district court hadn't acted yet. They hadn't made a determination of what the facts in this case were. The Circuit Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, looked at the injunction that was filed by these plaintiffs on behalf of these illegals, and they said, hey, district court hasn't had a chance to do their job yet. And then there was an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. So it was premature. The Supreme Court should not have gotten involved the way they did. They should have said, no, let the district court resolve this, because keep in mind, whether they have to or not, the president has directed that his administration wait for this case to play out. So there was no danger of these individuals being immediately deported. Okay. The administration had said, we will wait and at least let this injunction be filed and ruled on by the district court. So that's really what we're dealing with here. It's a very nuanced, very specific decision from the Supreme Court, but it does stand for the principle that the Supreme Court thinks there's some level of due process that needs to be given to these individuals, and that there was not enough due process in these cases.
Okay, so just following up on that, because I'm not an expert, Davis, you're the expert here, but it's really dumbfounding to me, so I have to get your thoughts about this. So millions of people can come here illegally, totally evading any kind of legal process, legal procedure, what have you. But then before they get kicked out, they feel entitled. Yeah, entitled to going through a legal process. I don't understand that, and I'm really trying to understand the logic behind it, because it just seems so odd to me.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and it's a real practical question. And I laugh, but I was talking to my 14-year-old daughter last night. I was taking her to her dance class, and I said, okay, if someone comes into the United States illegally, meaning it is illegal to be here, they snuck across the border, what should happen to them when they're caught? And she said, well, they should be sent back. And I said, okay, but how, shouldn't they be allowed to stay here for a time? Shouldn't they be given, the opportunity to appear for a court hearing and things like that? And she goes, no, they should go back. And if there was a problem, they can apply for citizenship from the country they were in. They're from. And, it's obviously a simplified thing, but I just kind of smile because, my 14-year-old daughter gets it. She understands it. And you're absolutely right. There was a orchestrated invasion of the country, allowing many, many thousands, millions of unvetted, potentially dangerous terrorists and others to come into our country. There was no due process for the American people when it came to that invasion. And now that the President of the United States is using a law that exists on the book under the Alien Enemies Act, he has properly issued a finding and a proclamation. It feels like even the Supreme Court may attempt to stifle that by leveling different avenues of due process. And remember, we're in this mess because of the policies of the Biden administration and their total loss of control of the southern border.
Fascinating analysis, Davis, so thank you for that. One last thing I want to pivot to. So we've seen a lot of effort and hustle with deportations from Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, and just yesterday, on Monday, we saw the first self-deportation flight from the U.S. land in Honduras. I want to get your thoughts about that because this is a first in U.S. history, and it really speaks to the fact that this administration, unlike the previous one, is really putting public safety first. So what do you think about this, Davis?
Listen, I think it sends a clear message to the American people as well as to people all around the world that when you have clear policies, easily understood policies, then appropriate things happen. What should happen is people who are here illegally, when they know the law is going to be enforced, they should have the opportunity to leave and go home, and they should go home on their own.
Yes.
Doing anything else, I mean, here's the real tragedy of what the Biden administration's policies did. They encouraged illegal immigration, and they caused the lives of thousands of people who we will never know their names, who died doing the dangerous border crossing at the hands of coyotes and other smugglers. And so let alone just the tragedies of the American people and the violence we have suffered because of illegal immigration, this creates just a human crisis on the border and in the border regions when you have this unfettered, unclear policy and people stream in and they take extreme measures to do it. So I'm just thankful that we have clear guidance from the White House, clear guidance from the administration, and really a policy that reflects an actual care about human decency when it comes to protecting both the American people and the vulnerable people that would be trying to get in illegally.
Very well said, Davis, truly. I am right there with you. So thank you for your brilliant analysis, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Take care.
It's left to men like Davis Younts to fight for these Navy SEALs.
Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval